walk. Hopefully we'll get outside today a little bit, enjoy the sun and the fresh air. Okay, I think we have critical mass, and so I will start. Hi everyone, and welcome to the U54 Partnership Design, Research Design and Analysis Core Seminar. I think I know everyone here. And I'll be moderating today's session. As many of you know, we hold these seminars, we hold 3 to 4 a year, usually in the academic year. And stay tuned for future speakers. We record these, and we then post the recording on the partnership website. And I encourage folks to go to that website and look at what's already there. There are some interesting topics. Folks who have spoken in the past have told us that they're always open for people to reach out and contact them. So if you view something and you think it would be interesting to students or colleagues or something else, but you have further questions, please feel free to reach out to people. They're more than willing to lend a hand. So I will monitor the chat for any questions. And then we'll have time also to have questions at the end and some discussion. Today, we're pleased to have Dr. Estrada-Martinez with us to talk about community-driven assessment of environmental health risks in Puerto Rico. Dr. Estrada-Martinez is a social epidemiologist and associate professor of environmental and public health at the University of Massachusetts, Boston School for the Environment. She's currently leading a transdisciplinary team examining the health impacts of the U.S. Navy's operations and contamination in, is it Vieques, Puerto Rico?
Vieques.
Vieques. Striving to develop innovative approaches to reduce contamination levels and enhance water and food security. Her research incorporates life course and ecological frameworks to investigate racial and ethnic health inequities, focusing on the impact of community contexts on health outcomes. Her expertise includes health disparities, Latino health, youth, families, neighborhoods, environmental health, environmental justice, survey methodology, quantitative methodology, statistical analysis, and community-based participatory research. So it sounds like she is very much in the realm of everything that this group is also doing. So I will let you take it from there. Thank you for speaking today.
Thank you for having me. It's great to see all of you. And thank you to Eileen for putting this together. She was one of my star students at UMass Boston, and it's always great to see her. I'm going to share my slides. Can everybody see that? Roughly, sort of?
Yes.
Perfect. So here's my contact information. If people have questions, I'm happy to answer them. And if you have questions along the way, stop me and I will pause for questions. I was telling Eileen, we're actually finishing up our 5th year and starting our 6th year and final year of this project. I know it sounds like a long time, but pandemic, hurricanes, droughts, just different things happened in the world and in Puerto Rico. So it's taken us a little bit longer. But we are sort of at a place where we are doing a lot of analysis of data that we have collected over the last few years. And I don't have a whole lot of results to show that are absolute. I think those are going to come in the next few months. But I do want to talk more about the role of the community and how we've engaged and worked with community members in Vieques throughout the different phases of our project. How do you work with, right, directly with sometimes community activists, others just sort of residents, sometimes patients. Um, and so here we go. All right, let me, so many slides at the same time. So this is one of our beaches in Vieques, which is really beautiful, and I encourage everybody to come visit. Now, if you don't know where Vieques is exactly, here is our map of the Caribbean. Puerto Rico is an archipelago, and we have the main island, which is what people usually go to, but we also have Vieques and Culebra that are towns. These are municipalities where people live. Vieques being the largest of them. Now, before 1942, all of Vieques was open to the public, so to speak. But it was actually before 1898, it was its own colony of Spain. It was the Americans that made it, in terms of jurisdiction, a part of Puerto Rico. So that's an important thing to remember because they turn out to be sort of the colony of Puerto Rico and in a very marginalized position. Now, having said that, they were an incredibly productive land in terms of agriculture. There were 5 major sugar mills in Vieques alone, and they also produced pineapple, mesquite, and a whole bunch of other products that were exported to the main island, but also just to Europe and Spain and parts of the United States. So it was really an island that economically had it going on. Now, after the US invasion of Puerto Rico, and then after 1942, they passed a series of laws where the US Navy was allowed then to take ownership and expropriate most of the land in Vieques. And so this is a map, and this is an even closer map where you can see how things were divided at that time. They took everybody from the whole of the island and sort of squished everybody into this civilian area. They used the eastern half of the island as a live testing site for and practice site. Used any type of weapons that they wanted to test at the time. And here in the western, sort of the second half of the western half, they used it as a support center. So this is sort of where they had storage and ammunitions and fuel, that kind of thing. And so they really were taking over all of Vieques. Although there were historically several attempts to take over the whole of the island, ultimately in the 60s, they decided that they were not going to get anywhere because of the resistance of the people in Vieques and also the Catholic Church. And the reason why it was the Catholic Church was because part of their plan was to remove everybody from the cemeteries, which were at this point 300 years old. And the Catholic Church was not having that. So they sort of were united in their campaign and ultimately prevailed. And this is what we're talking about when we talk about a military occupation, right? I just wanted to show you some images, and I can go into many details of dates of when things were found, and but ultimately Vieques was seeing about 200 days per year of bombing. So that's a pretty consistent, slew of bombs, some of which were very close to the civilian zones. In 1999, they admitted finally to having using depleted uranium in Vieques, most of which has still not been found. So there's certainly a lot of stuff going on in the restricted zones. Now, some of you might remember, but in 1999, a bomb was dropped on a building in Vieques, which is actually very far in the restricted zones. I'm not sure how they could have missed it. This is a huge building. I've been to it. But they accidentally dropped some bombs and killed a civilian, injured others. Um, and so that led to an increase in the international pressure and uh, a civil disobedience movement that occurred for a few years in the island. People took over the beaches, they took over the oceans in kayaks, in boats, and jet skis, people just in the water to make sure that they couldn't bomb. And it worked. In 2003, finally, May 1st, 2003, they turned over the land to the US Department of the Interior and declared it a Superfund site and a wildlife refuge at the same time, which is a little contradictory, but there you have it. These are just other images of what we are seeing in the water. Now, currently what they do is that they are in a very long phase of debris removal, is what they call it. And what they're doing by removing the debris is that they put it all together, kind of like here. I don't know if you see my cursor. Do you? And then they light it on fire, and then there's basically an open detonation situation. Sometimes it's really big bombs, and so you can see the mushroom cloud from the town. It's still a significant, they're not bombing anymore, but there's still significant contamination happening. Having said that, Vieques are the most resilient group of people I've met in person. And they are having none of it. So this is a very well organized town. I mean, there's about 8,200 people that live year round in Vieques. Many have for generations. And this is just some of the sort of younger generations that have become activists in the last 10 years. But this is a town that has been studied a lot, as you can imagine, by many epidemiologists and other public health experts, and just, social scientists, anthropologists, and the like. Now, in 2013, ATSDR came out with a report, and we know ATSDR sort of technically we're supposed to follow it for policy and resources, but they basically said there's nothing here to be found. They were saying, well, there's not significant exposure for the fish. We're not going to do any biomonitoring because we're not recommending any biomonitoring. There is insufficient data on the local produce and livestock. Their argument was that it was unlikely that there was any air-based contamination. That as long as people didn't go into the restricted zones, that there was no problem with any of the soil, and all of the water is great except in one particular private well that they identified. Now, of course, on the other hand, you have a whole bunch of independent researchers saying the opposite, right? In many different types of studies. And so in Vieques, the question really becomes, how do you do a study that is really respectful to the community dynamics, to the history of what happened here, in a way where the people trust the researchers and trust the outcome of the research, but that is also sort of looking at this really complex, what in urban planning my colleagues call those wicked problems, right? Where it's not just a matter of exposure, dose exposure, and then the outcome, right? Like these simpler models, but something that is quite possibly changing even how we understand compound vulnerabilities and compound contamination over time. So after many decades of activism, a group of Viequenses finally got into the US Congress and were able to secure a line in the Appropriations Act of 2018. And this is the language of the act. I just sort of wanted to put it out there. It required partnership with the municipality. It required a public health perspective. But also they wanted, like we want you to test, evaluate, quantify, and mitigate the toxic substances everywhere, and then fix it. And so it was complicated. And the EPA requested specifically that it be a CBPR approach that be used. Now I have to say, when this first came out, I was very reluctant to submit anything. And when we started working as a team and even having the discussions of, is this something that we're interested in? I was there in college when they killed David Sanes. I was there as part of, as a student, right? As a college student, as part of that movement of people that were trying to get the Navy to stop bombing, and feeling that I was going to have to negotiate with the Navy anything just gave me a lot of pause. But ultimately, after talking to residents, we went for it. And we created sort of the skeleton of a proposal for the EPA, but that was really fundamentally based on CBPR and sort of coining and saying, well, we actually haven't had this type of relationship with the people in Vieques, so this is how we plan to do it. And we put, these concepts of cultural humility and cultural safety really front and center into the way that we're working with the community. I'm not going to go into what CBPR is because of the audience, but if people have questions, I'm happy to answer them. Now, ultimately, our original, what we're calling, I'm going to call it Vieques 1 because we just started Vieques 3. But Vieques 1, our aims were to really use a person-centered environmental assessment approach, right? We wanted to understand how people would have been exposed to different things at different points in their life to maybe identify a sensitive, critical period, or identify historically something that we can say, well, this is what happened, but we're confident that that might be just going down. And now it's a matter of sort of having a new population that wasn't exposed to the direct bombing. I mean, that could be it, right? It isn't, but we'll we'll allow for that as a possibility. We also wanted to make sure that we had a resident-led data monitoring decision-making infrastructure. We wanted to use citizen science, participatory community engagement, and then one of the things that they wanted was mitigation. So we wanted to develop a plant-based remediation system and train people in the community to do it. So ultimately, this is sort of the skeleton that I was talking about. And the CSC is the Community Academic Steering Committee, which we later changed to just the CASC. But the idea here was that we were going to first form that group, then do the focus groups, that community health assessment, go back to the group and make some fundamental decisions. And then we would go out into our data collection and our modeling and all of that. And the last time that I presented at the U54 in 2022, we were here, right here. We had done the focus groups. We came to you guys with a whole bunch of information and questions because we weren't sure if cancer was going to be the outcome that the community was going to ultimately choose. And we needed sort of just more information to be able to justify and design a good study on cancer. So I'm going to show you a little bit of what happened with that. The community steering committee is the team that plans, implements, prioritizes. It's sort of the decision-making body of our project. They are contributing to data collection, analysis, interpretation. I mean, they really are involved at every stage of our project. We attempted as much as possible to be representative of different sectors in Vieques. But since it's not a small, it's a small town and it's an island, there's a lot of cross-pollination that happens, and a lot of the people that are involved here are involved there. And so ultimately, we got a really good working group. And some are working in a very official capacity, and some are more like, I don't want to vote, but I want you to hear my opinion. And then ultimately, that's the opinion that we go for. And you have to kind of just be nimble and flexible to work and to help people feel most comfortable, addressing these issues. We have 15 votes, and 2/3 are residents of Vieques. So ultimately, the residents could override what the scientific team is proposing. It hasn't happened yet, but in theory, it could. Now, in the summer of 2021, we started in 2020, in May 2020, so 2 months after the pandemic had been declared. So it took us a while to be able to go into the field, as you can imagine. But when we finally did, we spent between 1 and 6 weeks. I was there for 6 weeks, getting a lot done, getting a lot of the people in a room for the first time in a long time. We had meetings with the mayor and the vice mayor. We ran our focus groups and our timeline interviews. We did some sampling of crabs. We did some preliminary sampling for preliminary analysis of water and soil. We were working with graduate students. We brought a whole bunch of people into the field. We had a really great scientific and cask, like everybody retreat in a castle type of structure in Vieques, which was very cool, where we honed down and finalized our MOU and our principles and how we were going to be working together. And we also got to meet the other side. The US Navy reps gave us, allowed us in and gave us a tour all the way in. It's really, really big, much bigger than people realize how much land we're really talking about. And so ultimately, the results from that summer's field work showed that people had particular perceptions of where illnesses were clustered and where contamination was clustered. So they identified these barrios in Destino and Luján, which are here, and the Santa Maria and Isabel II, which is the main town in Vieques, as places where people were in poor health, and there were some cancer clusters. And then they identified, as one would, obviously, the places that were being bombed and where there were, storing things. But also they identified Isabel II, Esperanza. These are highly densely populated areas. Luján is as well, and then some specific beaches. This is the bioluminescent bay, which some of you might have heard about, the Bio Bay. Also, Caracas Beach and La Chiva, which was described as a cemetery of bombs if you went into the water, and Guiani Lagoon over here. And so this is sort of our conceptual model of exposure and disease in Vieques. Based on the information that we gathered that summer, people were concerned about a lot of diseases, but these sort of bubbled up to the top as the most frequently mentioned. Cancer, asthma, kidney disease is actually quite prevalent in Vieques, mental health issues, and thyroid disorders. So we sort of looked at the literature and identified, okay, so this is all the stuff that we know has been found in Vieques. We don't even have to do it ourselves. This has been confirmed. And what are the things that are mostly um, been related to those in the literature, right? And so again, cancer and kidney disease sort of bubbled up to the surface as the most frequent. Um, and clearly, we can't look at everything. It's not a very big population. We had some issues, but people were really just concerned about these two as our outcomes. And this is when we last came to you guys because we had this issue of like, well, we have the size of the population is small. So even in the worst of cases, you're only going to see 20 to, 40 at most new cancer cases any given year, right? And that'll include skin cancer, which we had decided not to include because it's a tropical island and a lot of people get skin cancer. There's also the issue of like the 5-year incident, right? The 5-year incidence and survival rate. Part of this has to do also with the outmigration for care. If you stay in Vieques, your chances of not surviving after those 5 years is 30% higher. And that has more to do with the lack of healthcare infrastructure in Vieques. So access to healthcare issues than anything else. So most of the people at some point will, and this is true for any like seriously life-threatening chronic disease, they will ultimately move to the main island or even to the US for care. It is a place that there's been a lot of outmigration. So if I'm 65 years old, I likely have children or family members that live in the main island, and I could go stay there for periods of time to be able to go to the main cancer center in San Juan or get dialysis or whatnot. So that was a big part of our concern. And the other was, how do you quantify exposure in a small island, right? So presumably anybody in Vieques or everybody in Vieques has been exposed to some degree, no matter where they live. So is this an issue of comparing people in Vieques to people out of Vieques? Or were we trying to like really sort of uncover details of potential pathways within Vieques, right? So we had a lot of decisions at that time that we needed to make. And you guys came to the rescue. And we had a series of meetings after I did my presentation. Ultimately went back to Vieques and showed them what we learned. And the people in April of 2022 determined that cancer was going to be our focus. We were able to sort of create the conceptual map of like, well, it can be any cancer because if you've been exposed to these, and like this list of contaminants that we're looking at, all of them have been shown. And so we're more interested in pathways of exposure, not quantifying the amount of exposure or in that, we don't have the bandwidth, we don't have the money to do and the time to do that. So this is a bit of a timeline since then, and I'm going to give you a little bit of examples of where we've done. But since April 22, we of course then had to design instruments and design our recruitment strategy and do and do all of our interviews. And now currently we are in the analysis and model building phase. So we have done all of our interviews. We created our data set, we cleaned it. And we have somebody on your side of the river helping us with the analysis. So we're really excited in a few months to be able to show some results. So I'm going to kind of give you a little bit of a breakdown of who our sample is. This is not so far, this is our sample. So we wanted to do a case control where we compared 75 people with cancer that were long-term Vieques residents and that had been diagnosed, after having lived in Vieques, right? And we compared them with 125 controls. Now, the average age for the cases was 65, and the range was 30 to 89, versus controls, which was 43.7 with a range of 24 to 89. And 57% of all participants were females. And really, smoking seems to not have been a huge thing. Only 25% were former smokers, and only 1% was a current smoker. Now, of the cancer cases, the average age of diagnosis was 55, but there was a range of infancy to 80. So if you took out the infancy, like the lower extremes, that went up to 58. So it's not, so still, yeah. 53% had a family history of cancer in sort of an immediate family member. And I can tell you in our preliminary analysis that we are doing right now, we can see from the life history calendars and from our food questionnaires that people, the cases did consume more Vieques grown or raised foods, so both produce and meats and stuff, than the controls. So that is one part. Now, as you can imagine, working in a place where the population is, for a whole bunch of really, really good reasons, very distrustful of researchers and research that are being funded by the federal government. So we had to really rely on and work closely and slowly, purposefully, mindfully, slowly, with our community partners and and the staff that we hired, that are residents in Vieques. So I wanted to just list out some of the issues that we encountered in the human health assessment in particular, where the community partners and community members were just central to being able to move forward in the project. The first is that despite there being a cancer registry in theory, there is no actual central list of cancer patients in Vieques. Because of those movements, because of some legacy understanding of how the healthcare system in Puerto Rico works, which has changed, but people still sort of, especially older folks, still sort of work it in that old school way. So we ultimately adopted a multi-pronged strategy for finding cancer patients in Vieques. We first worked with a community-based organization that provides services to cancer patients, Vieques en Rescates. And so that was sort of our initial list of people. And we worked, even though that community organization was not an official part of our steering committee, we sort of included them in all our communication of making sure that people were kept informed of the progress in the work. Vieques is big on Facebook. So we ultimately used Facebook. It was better than having a website, community email list, and we created the different WhatsApp groups because that also is one of their primary ways of communication. We mobilized our steering committee members and other community members to personally go out and recruit people that they knew that were cancer patients. Again, not a huge town. And we distributed flyers. We went to community events, different locations, so where there was a lot of just outreach promotion. And ultimately, there's a lot of churches in Vieques, especially considering the size of the population. There's a lot of churches in Vieques, like 100 churches in Vieques. And so we worked with some of the bigger ones and with leaders to do congregational outreach and sort of for them to see that different community groups had been tapped on and working directly with us. Now, once we started with this process, we sort of reached a moment where we were like, well, this is really great, but all of the people that are signing up are women, or the vast majority are women, which is not uncommon in health research or any research. But we really needed to make sure that we were including more men. That was a vital importance. So the first thing that we did was to gather the local perspectives on the barriers, right? Like why are they not showing up, right? Why are men not answering the phone? Why are they not answering um, our efforts? And so ultimately what we did is that we worked with some of the men in our networks, whether they were members of the steering committee or just sort of what I call like very close friends of the project, people that, fought against the Navy and were very much a part of that, have a lot of clout in the community. And they helped us recruit. And so ultimately we have a much better gender balance, right? 40 something percent are men, so we're not in a terrible situation. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there was a lot of community mistrust and also doubts in our ability to do what we said we were going to do. So it wasn't necessarily that everybody was like, who are these researchers and why are they here? Who are these people? I actually have a lot of personal connections and family connections in Vieques. So they knew who I was and knew sort of the perspective that we were bringing and our kind of political understanding of what had happened. But they still were like, well, can they do what they're saying they want to do? And so that was then the academics, the steering committee really like was then the one who had to step in and really work on developing different strategies and messaging on the perspectives of the residents that were part of the project and why they saw it as beneficial to the community. We also then, instead of bringing interviewers from the University of Puerto Rico, we ultimately hired and trained residents to be the interviewers. And that was really helpful as well. And we worked with them directly, brainstorming. There were like weekly meetings about recruitment and language. And, so it was a very intense, finally, that very year-long intense process, which I'm sure many of you can appreciate. But we also were doing life history calendars. So our interviews were like long and sometimes painful, and people would cry. Remember, like it was an intense process. But we're done with that part. Yay. Now this is a bit of our baseline information, mainly breast and prostate cancer, but a big chunk of other very rare cancers as well. And this is not even including the children, right? Because we weren't including children in our study. And again, we're now doing analysis and consulting with some GIS experts in Spain so that we can do the mapping of the the coordinates for the life history calendar. We can show different kinds of results in the next year or so. So stay tuned for that. I'm mindful of time, so I'm not going to go into all these other like technical parts, but I do want to sort of show you, we did do the ecological risk assessments. We were interested in different areas based on what the community had mentioned. We did our preliminary sampling and then our actual sampling. And one of the things that was really important for this particular phase was that because we were going to restricted zones with active bombs, we needed to go with people that were trained, right? I couldn't just send students to dig things up. And so we couldn't do some of it ourselves, and we had to work with the Navy and their subcontractors to gain access to the area. And ultimately, what we did was that we had community members and residents be observers and part of the team that would go with the Navy and their subcontractors to do the sampling, even if we had to stay at a certain distance. And then we would video recorded everything that was happening, like all of the sampling. And so these links here are the YouTube links of very long videos of what was happening and all of the recording, so that we could share that publicly with the people in Vieques who had those concerns. So that was us. We've now done some preliminary results and are working with this Spanish team to do our mapping. And then we also did the water sampling that I mentioned and found some interesting out of bounds things. So in 3 weeks, we're going to use these portable X-ray machines to do a whole bunch of sampling in the community to create the hot maps. For then some transectional sampling, and this is how we're going to do it, from transectional sampling and ICP-MS analysis of everything, basically everything. And then Adan Colon Carmona, who is part of your group on our side, he is the PI in charge of the phytoremediation. And the poor guy had to go through pandemic, drought, and hurricane delays that kept killing the experimental plots. But finally, in 2023, they flourished, and I'm very happy. And these are some of our pictures. I think that that's sort of where I'm going to leave it. I have sort of how they were growing. But I'll just sort of leave it here for discussion and questions. I know it's very big and it has so many components, so it takes a while to sort of wrap our head around it, but we're really excited. We have since received additional funding to do air sampling and monitoring. Helen Poynton is the PI, that's Vieques too, and just started a new project on community-driven solutions, sort of in the context of climate change as well, for this small island, and that is Vieques 3. So we keep on chugging as long as they let us.
Thank you. I really appreciate the all of this information. I think others do too. We have time for questions.
Do it.
Now the question is, how do I make this work? So does anyone have any questions?
I can start.
Okay, great.
This is Shoba. And again, sorry, I can't see you, or you can't see me, but I can see
I
you.
can see it.
Thank you for this wonderful presentation. I think a U54 presentation is actually how I first became familiar with your work. So it's really wonderful to see how much progress you've made in the last couple of years. One of the things that really came out to me was just the level of intentionality and respect throughout the process. And something I've been thinking about a lot is, we're all of us who do community engaged research are sort of consistently up against these institutional pressures and sort of research norms and all these things that are about hurry, hurry, do more, count more. And I'm wondering if you could share with the group, like, you may be oriented that way, but how do you help teams and collaborators and others like really understand the value of being very focused and intentional, and that is what truly gets us the kind of science we need, the kind of social change we need?
That's a really good question. I was an assistant professor too, so there were layers to this, to the madness that we were about to embark in. And if I'm being really honest with myself, well, a few things. I was sort of selected PI of the team because I hadn't I was UMass is complicated and there are stories that are way above my pay scale to understand, but um I had been transferred from a different college that got shut down into the School for the Environment at the same time that Maria happened, and I was pregnant with my first baby. And like there was just like a bunch of things that aligned. And when I went into what is now the Department of Urban Planning and Community Development in the School for the Environment as a social epidemiologist. So I had the benefit that they had no idea what I was talking about for the most part. I mean, a lot of folks were like geologists and oceanographers, like they do other types of research. And I, and they all really wanted to work with communities. They are all interested in gathering data, in the Arctic, in Massachusetts, in different parts. So a part of this was me having a frank discussion with who the dean was at the time and being when I came in, I was like, listen, this is what I do. I'm happy to play second fiddle for other people and to explain how to do this. But the work that I do is it takes a long time, and Puerto Rico just went through this incredibly traumatic situation that at the time that had it was very much still during the blackout, right? That we were having those conversations. So a lot of just my work naturally transitioned to be about things that were in Puerto Rico that had, like just a traumatized island with there were just layers to that. And I think that they um, knew that they didn't know enough and were able to say, okay, this takes time. Um, Bob Chen, who then became the interim dean, um, was in my team and also really supportive. And because he came to all of our meetings, he saw like the pace at which things were happening. And I think and he's a chemical oceanographer, but I think that that really brought home the point of like, this is how you have to move. Um, and I was because I know Vieques, I was always like very just protective of the island, and because not just Maria, but like, like these folks were bombed for 63 years. Like, yes, they have very good reasons to not trust anyone that comes through these shores, and you have to understand that you have to earn their trust, which takes years at sometimes and about 3 seconds to break down if you are coming with an attitude of like, I'm your savior. Like they don't need to be saved, right? Like that's not what we're doing here. So the first year and a half, and timing is everything, it happened at the pandemic. So it forced us to slow down on some of these things. Um, I don't know how it would have happened otherwise, but um, it gave us the time for me to like slowly have one-on-one conversations or like two-on-one conversations with a lot of people in Vieques at a time where everybody was at home. And so they were paying attention. Once things opened up, the pace of things sort of shifted, right? But it was really about flexibility, about being able to convince the people that were ultimately evaluating my performance as a scholar and in the tenure track, the value, and also showing that I was moving, right? It wasn't that the pandemic happened and I'm just going to sit here. I mean, we're going to move slower, but we're going to move. And that first year, I'm sure that I was driving everybody in Vieques crazy because I didn't want to make decisions without them. And that backfired a little bit, a tiny bit. But even though it did, at some point they were like, Lorena, you're the expert. Make a choice. Like decide, move on with this question. But even that, like I think that they saw that my reluctance to make a choice without consulting with them, like was a respectful way of me being like, listen, I don't live there. You're the one that has to ultimately live with these choices. So how do you want me to do it? And then I'll make sure that it happens that way. Um, so yeah, I mean, I don't know that I would have the same results if I suddenly went to a community that I really, really am not a part of, right? That I'm like, if I suddenly go to the Appalachian Mountains to do something, well, I'm clearly not a white American. I'm not even an American. I'm a citizen because 1917, that's a long story. But like like would they see me in that same way? How long would it have to take? Like those things I think are really, really context dependent. And so it helps to roughly look like them. I'm glowing now because of the sun. The lack of sun has made me glow. And in Puerto Rico, I'm nice and dark. But other than that, like having the same slang helps, the same language, like a similar cultural understanding of suavecito, like of how you engage with the churches, how you engage with your elders, how you engage. Um, Anytime that somebody new from the team went to Vieques that I was taking them, I would like make sure. Some people think that this might have been a waste of time, but I'm like, I made sure that I put them in a car and I took them to places and I went and I just showed them around the town and introduced them to people randomly and let's go have a beer with this person or coffee with this person or something, like, don't get drunk or anything, but like be social, let them get to know you as a person, hear their stories, um, listen to their concerns, even if you can't do what they're asking you to do, but there's a reason why they're asking you to do it that way, and you need to, at a minimum, listen. Um, and so those are, I guess, things that we and yeah, it's worked. The other part is that I have an amazing team of people that I work with at UMass and elsewhere. People that are really committed, um, whatever their field might be, that they were really committed to that vision and weren't, trying to push inappropriately or at a speed that I would have to, like that, not in a way that ultimately broke things, right? People were concerned at different points, and we just have to be like, listen, they move in a different rhythm, and we just have to uh, move move with them at that rhythm. And that's okay. Like that's ultimately going to make it better in the end. But yeah, I think that the team and people liking the team, the members of the team, was also really relevant. Um, there was one person that they didn't like very much, and I haven't taken them again. I'm like, you can help with something, like you have to know like what your strengths are, right? Some people are not good with others. And I hope that answers. I went on and on.
That's great. No, thank you. Appreciate it.
I think in a lot of ways you summed up a lot of what we do talk about in terms of community-based participatory research and that, avoidance of helicoptering in. Because we need to do research and there's a convenient population, so we're gonna zip in and zip out and thank you very much. Wherein it sounds like you were really embedded and it showed that caring.
I mean, I will be there the next 50 years if they let me, right? It's a beautiful tropical island. Where else would I want to go? That's like saying I'm going to go to Rome or something. Like, sure, it's beautiful. Go do that. But I think that there's really, you have to sort of think about it long term. These are not short relationships, nor do they want them to be short relationships. They already had that and they hate it, and they clearly told us, directly told us, if this is what you're about, no thanks. Yeah, I think that those are there has to be some institutional buy-in, and UMass Boston is very strong on community engaged work in general. There's a lot of people that do it in a lot of different capacities with a lot of different communities, but they understand the principles of it and can help like evaluate and address concerns. So that's cool.
Are there other questions?
Not a question. I just wanted to say thank you. It was such a interesting, like fascinating talk. I really appreciate you taking the time to share it.
Problem. I'm happy to. And next year, hopefully I can like show actual results of our research questions. But right now we are deep in analysis. We're doing DNA and RNA analysis on some stuff. We're doing the life history calendar analysis. So everyone's sort of deep in that right now. But hopefully soon.
Very cool.
Well, we look forward to having you back then.
Absolutely.
Great.
And Adan, I'm sure, can also give updates because he's part of all of the Vieques efforts. He's been instrumental. So thank you guys for existing and for working on the U54. It's been really helpful to have that perspective.
Great.
All right, Vale. Have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much. Take care.
Take care.